As readers, we tend to take for granted the answer to the question of whether we should read or not. Of course we should read. Why wouldn't we? However, there are legitimate reasons to not read, many of which I myself actually find quite persuasive. So what are they? Reading is often time-consuming and a pretty lonely task. Readers are often by themselves, tucked away in little nooks, with no noise coming from the outside world, hour after hour, just silently reading away. Their friends attend lavish dinner parties, their families dine without them, and many of their relationships go unbuilt or simply undeveloped, all because they chose to sit in a probably dimly lit room with a bunch of dusty books, reading silently by themselves. Take as example the weekend. A lot of people, when the weekend comes, will take breaks for their pleasures, their hobbies, their things they do when they're not working. Maybe they go on a weekend road trip with their friends, maybe they go to events or engage in some kind of adventurous lifestyle. Readers, however, simply just pick up a book. And they read not for 1 hour, not for 2 hours, nor for even 3 hours. Instead, they likely read for 5 or 6 hours, if not 7 or 8. And after 8, 10, maybe 12 chapters, the entire weekend has gone by for the reader, and as a result, they've basically chosen not to hang out with their friends, make meaningful memories on trips or weekend road trips, or engage in adventurous nightlife. They've simply chosen to read a book. So in the same way that we say people who watch television all weekend have arguably wasted their weekend or their life, some people would say that a reader, perhaps a little bit more mindfully, has chosen to miss out on life. A problem for nonfiction readers in particular is the diminished returns gained from reading another book. A lot of people will justify reading a book because the short-term sacrifice they have to make in their time commitments and maybe their attention commitments will later, as a result of the skills or knowledge they acquired from reading a book, pay out a huge quality of life dividend. People will read finance books, self-help books, or nutrition books, or even exercise science books, all to improve their quality of life, which works very well in the beginning. Someone who knows absolutely nothing about finance, and as a result of their financial illiteracy, causes themselves extremely avoidable problems, they will, as a result of reading, see massive benefits in their financial life. Someone who knows absolutely nothing about self-help or self-knowledge or relationships will, as a result of reading self-help books, no longer form toxic relationships, probably have fewer personal dramas in their life, and will, as a result, have a better quality of life. However, somebody who spends another 20 hours reading their 52nd finance book will not experience the same kind of quality of life improvements that they got from reading their first finance book. Likewise, somebody who spends 20 hours reading their 42nd self-help book will not experience the same benefits they originally experienced when they read their first, second, or maybe even third self-help book. And as time goes on, this problem becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. 20 hours invested will get you 10% results, and then the next book, maybe 20 hours invested, will get you 8% results, and so on and so on and so on. Which begs the question, why spend 20 hours reading your 52nd finance book when you could spend 20 hours in the gym and improve your physical fitness by, say, 15%? Why spend 20 hours reading your 42nd self-help book when you could instead just go and form meaningful memories with your friends? At some point, the returns from reading become extremely diminished, but in addition to that, the opportunity costs become extremely high. To the surprise of pretty much no one, reading requires a lot of time to actually read a book. And a lot of people struggle to find that time to, in fact, read those books. So when they do find those hours littered here and there, why should they spend it on something that they don't even find fun? After all, many of the people who do read don't find it fun. In fact, they find something associated with reading fun. That is, reading becomes a means to an end. For many people, reading provides a sense of self-worth or gives them a bit of an ego boost, because when they finish a book, it is a sense of achievement, which then means their self-worth to some extent becomes a function of their consumption of, say, self-help books. I think we all know the reader who views themselves as a superior or better person because they read, or we all know the person who views themselves as better because they play chess, or even the student who gets good grades might view themselves as superior. It's that sense of accomplishment they derive from doing the task that then feeds into their egos or makes them feel better as a person that they're addicted to, not the task itself. Said otherwise, reading is not fun because you enjoy reading. Reading is fun because it provides you a sense of achievement. Which, furthermore, a lot of people actually start their reading journey by picking up self-help books, which means they wanted to solve a personal problem rather than actually start reading. And many years later, a lot of these people who have started reading because of self-help have kind of put it into their identity, and they're a little bit addicted to it. And so they can't simply stop reading, even though they don't find reading fun. So for a lot of people, reading is a means to an end, and it's not in and of itself quite a fun task for them. Often an overly stated point, I understand, but in the realm of reading, it is not obvious how this holds true. In the realm of reading, the more you read, you'll actually find the less you in fact know, which can actually be a negative thing, because the person who doesn't read and is utterly confident in their knowledge base will oftentimes have the same quality of life outcomes, assuming all else is equal. Just for a moment, imagine that you have two people who have the same IQ, the same educational background, the same personality traits, except one reads and the other one doesn't. You can quickly see that the quality of life that you have is not necessarily linked to being a reader. And this can be especially true when you consider topics like politics, history, or biographies. For instance, knowing the many intimate details of Afghan history will, if anything, leave you with neuroticism, because as you read more about Afghan history, you'll find further and further it is the case that you don't know anything about Afghan history, which will bother you. It's a quite common sentiment amongst readers that there's so much information out there and there's so little time. That's so frustrating. And so you're really left to ask, if I have a set of skills that are earning me money, and I have good character traits, and I have good social connections, and I have my health, why do I actually need to read? Especially when you consider the fact that, yeah, reading will oftentimes remind you how much you don't know, so it can make you a little bit neurotic. But not only that, there are some things that you could read that'll expose you to atrocities, like reading about the rape of Nanking, or something to this like. It's not obvious that you should be a reader, especially if, all else being equal, you have the skills and the character traits and so on and so forth. I don't hear readers talk about this point very often, but reading a lot will make it a lot harder to relate to other people. I've briefly mentioned this point before, but I think it's worth repeating here. And someone once said that I developed an allergy to small talk. Somebody commented this on my channel, but it's not just an allergy to small talk, it's a little bit more than that. For me personally, the way I earn a living is by analyzing financial data. That's how I make most of my money. And so making money already is an isolated task for me. And in addition to this, when I read, it is also an isolated task. So as a result of that, I ended up spending not a lot of time around people. And I find when this goes on for 10, 15, maybe sometimes 20 days, where I have very little contact with people, when I do end up in a crowd of people, I find myself more inwardly focused and not really paying attention to other people, but instead thinking about some of the ideas I've read or something of that nature. I'm a lot more inward as a result of reading. So you could argue my social skills were negatively impacted. In addition to this, my social stamina absolutely gets impacted when I don't go out and spend time with people. If I spend a lot of time reading, what I'll find is my ability to tolerate social settings will go from, say, 2 to 3 hours, because I'm already a pretty introverted person, down to about 1 hour. I will find that after 1 hour, I'll get pretty taxed if I've been reading a lot lately. Now, another thing that will make it hard to relate to others is twofold. When you're a reader, you will find that people who don't read often have pretty like factory pre-made, like standard factory setting opinions. They're pretty standard opinions, or their opinions are not nearly substantiated enough. Now, I recognize I'm probably in the extreme in this case, but because I've read a lot of nonfiction books, it's in the hundreds. Usually when I hear people give their opinions on topics relating to, let's say, philosophy, psychology, or economics, fields that I'm really well read in, I can pretty much, I can sometimes predict what they're going to say, but very rarely am I surprised by what they say. For instance, on the topic of, say, selfishness versus altruism, anybody who's basically never picked up a philosophy book has the same exact opinion. And it's like, I've heard it like 1,000 times now. When it comes to the topic of inflation, everybody has pretty much the same opinions as headlines. Nobody really talks about the different models used to measure inflation. Or when it comes to, say, the topic of the petrodollar, everybody again has the same opinion. Or even when it comes to China and the United States of America being in competition with one another, again, everybody has the same opinion. There's very little nuance to their opinions. And to make matters worse, a lot of the more intellectual topics that people even begin to show an interest in often find themselves in the realm of politically active topics, because there's a lot of political media that will sensationalize some of these intellectual disagreements, such as like taxes. And unfortunately, a lot of people just fall into their respective political camps on these topics, rather than having an open discussion about it, which makes it all the more worse for you, because those are the most predictable kinds of opinions. Which then gets to the next part of this point, which is that when people do make claims in ordinary conversation, it's such a stark contrast between them and writers. When writers make a massive claim, they'll usually have a bunch of evidence to support it, but people who don't read often will make massive claims, sometimes not even being aware of them making massive claims, with very little substantiation. And then it gets really difficult, because now you might have the urge to challenge them on the point they're making, but the problem becomes is that you have to balance it with social harmony. You can't just tell people they're wrong in a social setting, because you have to give lenience to the social harmony of the group. You don't want to make somebody upset in the group, because it will be bad for your status as a member of that group. And then even if you can disagree with somebody in that group, oftentimes because they're so unexposed to disagreement, they become very emotionally volatile quickly. Whereas people who are used to debating or having these disagreements, they're so used to it that they can remain calm when there's a disagreement. The point being, however, is that it gets really emotionally draining to balance people's emotions and also balance that fine line of social harmony versus urge to disagree. It's just really frustrating and exhausting. And as a result, it makes it hard to relate to other people, because you go, why even bother? Now, not all books are actually beneficial to read, and if you're someone who's maybe reached like the 50 book point or like the 60 book point, you'll realize you probably need to dedicate more time into researching the books that you are going to buy. I had this problem when I was very early in my reading career. I would see the headline of a book, like the title of a book. I would like the chapters, like mentioned, and I would like the subject, but I would then buy the book and find out that it's maybe too ideological, not enough substantiation, or for example, this is very popular in nutrition sciences, where writers will cite studies that look kind of interesting, but it turns out they weren't like randomized controlled trials, or there are randomized controlled trials that disagree with this non-randomized controlled trial study. The same thing happens with politics. People will cherry pick the data. And sometimes you even need a pretty decent background in statistics to even understand what certain pieces of data are saying. Why dedicate all this time to researching a book to like determine whether it's good or not, when you could just go do something else in life and again, still have the same quality of life as the person who is reading? It's not all that obvious that you want to develop the skills to actually pick good books to begin with, especially because you will knowingly spend money on bad books as you become a reader. That is a fact. You're going to buy bad books, and within the first 100 books that you buy, the number of bad books is going to be higher, obviously, than within the second 100 books that you buy, assuming that you've learned to research books. So that's just another reason why you maybe don't want to be a reader. So it's not obvious that everyone should actually be a reader. I know that popular culture tells you that you should be a reader, but I think popular culture tells you should be a reader because there's skills that you can acquire, which then can give you benefits. But if you're somebody who can learn skills without touching a book, which I know of quite a few people who can do that, you don't really need to read a book. So once you rule that out, it's not obvious that there are other reasons to read besides a natural curiosity or because you find it fun. And some people have personalities that are just not suited for reading. I know a ton of extroverts who they couldn't stand studying alone in university because they would get depressed if they spent too much time by themselves. Whereas I, on the other hand, I don't feel that depression when I'm by myself for a very long period of time, and others might. So it's not obvious that you should be a reader, and I think it's going to depend on your individual character traits, life circumstances, and what you want. So the answer to this video is a maybe. Let me know what you think down below. I'm curious what are some of the reasons why you won't read or don't read, but also some of the reasons why you do read. I myself just read because I think I'm a pretty curious person, and I score pretty high on openness to experience, which will explain why I jump between finance, math, politics, law, or economics or biology. I jump between a lot of subjects because I score high on openness to experience. But with that being said, and without going too much on a tangent, bye-bye till next time.